Okay, so in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to, uh, well, create a form, but more than that, do some layout in a form using CSS Float. So first thing I'm going to do is, well, I have brackets open, and I've already set it to my folder on the desktop. So I've set it to my home folder. I call it demo. And so I'm going to go ahead and save this page. Registration form.html. Okay, and just going to create a form here. I'm going to give it an action. Actually, I'll start by giving an ID. Okay, although that's not necessarily the first step, but I'm just going to put an ID here. I'm just going to call it reg form. And put in the basic ingredients of a form, which are, say, action. So I'm going to pretend that this form, when submitted, its data will be sent to a script, a server script called register.php or registeruser.php, and the method, usually we set this to post, although not all the time. Okay, so just usually. Okay. Next is I'm going to use divs to sections or sort of group the elements, and in this case I'm starting with the label tag, and this will mark up the label for the username. So I'll just call it uname, username, and I'm gonna need an input tag with a type text because I want a text box, and of course the required name attribute, and I'm going to put uname as the name and the ID also uname. Of course, that can be different in some cases. Now, I'm going to pretend that the maximum length for the username, let's say in this website, is say 12 characters. Okay. All right. Now, there are other attributes you can use on these elements, but I'll just leave it up to you to look it up on the references. But I'm trying to make this example as simple as possible. Now I'm going to need a password box. In fact, what I'm going to do, rather than typing in things all over again, I'm just going to copy this code that I've just typed, paste it here, replace the text with password, and I'm going to call this P word. Same thing over here, same thing over here. So name and ID. Of course, the type must not be text, rather password, because we want a password box. And let's say the password maximum length is 16. Okay. Let's preview this just to make sure things are okay. All right, looking good. All right. I mean, it doesn't look great, but I'm seeing the elements that I'm expecting to see given my HTML code. Okay, so the next step, I'm going to create another div, and I'm here going to put just np word, or let's say confirm. Why did I call it np word? Let's call it CP word, confirm password. So we'll have the user type the password again, and maybe later on you can add JavaScript to make sure that the contents of these two boxes are the same. And I'm gonna change the name and the ID also, rightfully so, to CP word, and make sure that my for attribute is consistent with the ID. Matter of fact. Okay, so that's p word, uname. Okay. I guess we'll ask one more thing from the user. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste the same code that I copied earlier. Of course, change things around. So this will be email. Okay. And of course, the ID will say, well, the for attribute, its value is the ID, must be the same as the ID. So I'm going to call this EML. Actually, we can call it email. Why not? Name also email, password email. Now, HTML5, thanks to HTML5, oh, I forgot. We could actually use text box here, but In HTML5, there is they introduced a new form component or form field. It's called, well, email. And what it does is it generates a text box. Usually, smartphones and tablets benefit from that. But yeah, I'll use that here. The requirement is simply to set the type of the input tag to email, and that's it. That'll produce an email text box, which looks no different than a text box. And I'm just going to eliminate the max length, or maybe increase it to something. I'll just put something ridiculous here. So let's say I'll put 75. Let's say that's the maximum. And finally, I'll put a submit button. And that's towards just before the form is closed. I'm going to put input type equals submit value equals register. Okay, so that's what people will see on the button. And let's test that. There you go. Form launches. Okay, I mean, it doesn't look great, but nevertheless, I'm seeing the elements. Now, next thing I'm going to do is create a CSS, I'm sorry, a style sheet, an internal style sheet, and that requires putting the style tag in the head section. Now, another thing I'm going to do is define the width of the form. So since the form tag has an ID, that makes it perfect. So I'm going to create a CSS rule here, where the selector is that ID of the form. And I'm going to say the width is, let's just say 600 pixels. And since we're playing with this, why not? Let's put a border, 1 pixel, solid, some light gray, very, very light gray. And let's do border radius as well of 10 pixels and padding that is, let's say, 20 pixels big. Okay. All right. Now, let's inspect that in the browser. Okay, it's coming along nicely. You got the border, very light, very subtle. I think that's a little too subtle, so let's make that a little darker. Save that. Refresh. There you go. So we can see the border a little bit more now. Okay, now I'm going to create a CSS rule that I'm going to use on these divs. And I'm going to use a class. Okay, I'm going to use a class. So, dot field, say field 1. Okay. As to why we're putting 1, actually I'm not sure myself. I'll just call it field 1. Okay, so this will be applied to the div that contains the form fields, and what I would like to do with that is put a padding also, but this time it's 10 pixels. Okay, and that's going to be applied to the divs. So we're going to put class equals field 1. All right, and I'm going to copy and paste that so it becomes like this. Okay, so all divs have that class equals field 1. So let's see the result. There you go. Okay, now what I could do also is, let's see, maybe for the confirm password, we can put that here on the right. Okay, so let's see. We'll create a field 2. But this one also padding 10 pixels. Let's see, field 1. I want to float field 2. Actually, I'm planning to use field 2 in the confirm password, so it sits next to this password box on the form. So it sits over here. Right now, it's over here, so you can see the outline. So I want it to go over here on the right of the password box. I think what I'll do is float field 1 to the left, but I'll add clear left, so kind of preventing the effect of an element that was previously floated. And I'm going to use, on field 2, I'm just going to put float left, and that's it, no clear. Okay, and put field 2 on the confirm password div. So instead of field 1, I'm going to put here field 2. Okay, so save that, refresh, there you go. Now, of course, the problem is the form didn't expand, didn't stretch vertically, as you can see. It didn't get taller, so to speak, given the contents of this form. So that's because there are the form tag being a block element. Right now it has float elements in it, and it doesn't have a height either. Now, of course, the solution is not to put a height. However, we can fix that problem, as stated in some references, I should say, by putting in the form, in the CSS rule on the form, overflow auto. Okay, so by doing that, there you go. That fixes the problem. I also didn't put width on the float one, so that the float one's width is determined by the length of the form or the elements that are in it. I think that's looking great. Let's see. Well, a simple BR at the end of each label would actually do something like this. Let me show you. Let me save that. Refresh my browser. There you go. So as you can see, the label sits on top of the text box rather than next on the left of it. I think that looks a little cleaner. And so what I'm going to do is shrink the form a little bit more because there's a lot of room to do it. I think I'm going to do 300 pixels. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's a little too narrow. Let's do 400. Okay, that's perfect. I think I want the email address box to be longer. Okay, but let me see. All right, and so what I'll do is target these text boxes. Well, target the email box rather. Sorry, target the email box. So the ID of the email box is, well, email. All right. So just going to put here a CSS rule. The ID selector is email, and set its width to, how about, let's try 240 pixels. Okay, I mean, that's okay. Now, what I'll also do is I want to tell the browser that any input tag in my form, let me see. Well, we can do this. We can create a CSS rule that selects multiple elements, and that will be uname, p-word, comma. Yep, you can use commas in your selector to select multiple elements. CP word, comma, email. Yes, we're targeting that too. And, well, we don't need to target the button. So I think that's all. Just those form elements, just those form fields. And what I'd like to do is put a padding of 15 pixels in all of them to make them that big. Okay. Or better yet, rather than making the padding that very big, what I'm gonna do is define the font. I'm sorry. Font size to be 100% of the font size that's applied to the entire page. So let's refresh that. There you go. So it's a little, easier to see. I think I'm also going to change the font to, let's use Verdana. And if that's not available, any sans serif font will do. Okay, there you go. And let's round off the corners a little bit by adding border radius and about 5 pixels. I think that will do it. But of course, browsers tend to render form fields differently. So as you can see here, I'm getting a slightly 3D looking form. So I think what I'll do is add a border that is some shade of dark mid-level gray. Okay, I think that's good enough. Okay, so there you go. I mean, I can style the form as well. I mean, the register button, and I'm beginning to see the confirm password sitting over here. So I think what I'll do is increase the width of the reg form to 600, so we'll have enough room. Back to the browser, refresh. There you go. So that's sitting nicely over there. Register button. Well, what I would suggest that you do is build a picture that looks like a button in Photoshop or Illustrator, and you would use input type equals image here, and then src equals, and then the file name of your picture. So if your button is in a images subfolder and it's called button.jpg or png or gif, you would put that here, much like the way you use an image tag. Now, because I don't have this, I'm gonna keep them. I'm gonna keep this as submit, and I'm gonna get rid of the src. Okay, and instead I'm gonna give this an ID. I'm gonna call this reg btn. I should have given an ID earlier, right? So anyway, I've just given an ID, reg btn, and so I'm gonna go up here, and let me see. Maybe we can add it here. Let's see what's gonna happen if we add it here in the CSS rule. I'm actually curious. So # reg btn, save it. Actually, if you didn't see it, it's right here again. Okay, so I added this, comma reg btn, save, refresh. Okay, I mean, it could be better. I can change the background color, but I'll have to separate this from the rest of the CSS rules over here. I mean, from the rest of the CSS rule, style it so very differently than the text boxes. But otherwise, I think it's okay. So with that being said, I hope you kind of have an idea a little bit as to how to style forms and do a little bit of basic layout using the float of CSS. The clear left here is necessary so that, let's say in this case, field 2, this was floated. So if I were to put another element that's floated, it would have sat next to it. So to prevent that from happening, all the elements that are here starting in the left column have clear left on them. So to prevent the browser from putting these floated elements next to another floated element, that's what the clear left does. Okay, all right, so I hope you learned something in this video tutorial.